Hello everyone, my name is Justin Kubiak and I'd like to take a little bit of time today to talk to you about a topic that is in the news that I think is very important, and that is sentencing reform. So what I'd like to do is to start off by just getting everyone to think a little bit and just wondering how many of you know someone who has been involved in the criminal justice system as a criminal defendant, maybe someone who was arrested and then nothing ever happened to them, or they were arrested, charged, went through the entire criminal justice system, ended up incarcerated either in a state prison or a federal prison, or on probation, maybe later released on parole. This type of sentencing, either community corrections, which is probation or parole, or incarceration, depending on the demographic and the area we're looking at least in the United States, can range from anywhere between 1 and 30 people up to 1 and about 200 people. So it affects quite a bit of people, and I would bet that at least one of you that is watching this has in some way been affected by that. So there's been a lot in the news lately about sentencing reform. Do we need the proportion of people locked up or in the system under community correction control, that sort of thing? Is that really the best thing for the country? So we look at what is our desired outcome. If our desired outcome is to lock everyone up who's committed a crime, then we're doing a pretty good job. If our desired outcome is corrections, so a corrective action, an action taken to correct a particular behavior, then maybe that's not appropriate, particularly when we look at recidivism rates that can go, can be north of 50%. Those numbers don't suggest that our sentencing structure as used today in the United States is having a corrective action as it portends to do. So we can look at a couple different models that are used around the world, and some have some peer-reviewed research that suggests that maybe this model is a little bit better than this model. A lot of it, though, at the end of the day, kind of boils down to what do we think works best for our society. We try to look at what some of the research says, but because that would require experimentation of sentencing with people, that's made the ethics become an issue there. So if we look at a place like Europe, many different European countries, they don't have a life without parole type thing. Most certainly don't have the death penalty. There's only one country in Europe that does, and that would be Belarus. The rest do not have a death penalty. Most, when you say life, it's really not life. It's like maybe 20 years, but most don't even use the word life sentence. They usually give that determinate sentencing of like 20 years or whatever. So the European model really has shifted away from incarceration for the sake of incarceration or sake of punishment to kind of a restorative model, which means lower sentences overall. Or what they do is which I think is better, and I think you'd probably agree, which is sentencing, match sentencing with the culpability in the act. So for example, you have a criminal enterprise, like a drug dealing enterprise, right? And you have multiple people involved in a drug dealing enterprise. Well, in the United States, if you're simply driving a vehicle, not simply to downplay the act, but you're not the overall leader, right? You're just driving a vehicle that has 20 tons of, or whatever, that's probably a bit much, maybe 20 pounds of cocaine. Well, you would probably get somewhere along the same sentence as the overall leader of this whole thing, right? So the lowest guy, who's simply just a delivery driver, probably just doing it to make some extra money, receiving the same sentence as the guy who's the overall kingpin. I don't think a whole lot of people would say that makes sense, right? So what's done in a lot of European countries is the guy who's driving the vehicle, right, he's got this small part to play in this whole thing. You could argue that, well, he's still doing drugs, he's still moving drugs that affects a lot of people. True. But if we're looking at the criminal enterprise as a whole, he's a small cog, he's just doing what he's told, he's not the overall leader. The European model would suggest, well, we don't need to sentence this guy the same way we would the kingpin. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, do we really want to incarcerate the guy who, the one side would say, do we really want to incarcerate the guy who is just, trying to provide for his family? Sure, he's probably not doing it in the best way, but do we need to lock him up for 30 years? Or maybe can we just give him 5 years, make sure he gets an education while he's inside? Because most people who are running drugs of that amount are probably doing it because they don't have a whole lot of other job skills. So why don't we lower that sentence that he'll get him educated, get him trained to do a job, get him back out there. He might not reoffend, right? So I think that would have the desired outcome of having that corrective measure, right? I think we all agree that corrective measures is what the criminal justice system is, supposed to do so that people don't recidivate. So why not go that route, right? We've been trying this, harsh sentencing and everything, and it has the effect of decreasing crime rates because people are locked up, right? But we don't know if they would have gotten out, if they would have actually not committed a new crime. I think that if we educate people while they're inside, give them maybe lower sentences, they'll have something to live for. They'll have now a skill, so they might go out and use that skill. Along with this, part of sentencing reform, you have to look at the entire thing from start to finish of the criminal justice system. When people get into the criminal justice system, they're locked up initially. They go in front of a judge for a bail hearing and such. One of the problems we have in this country is and there's an awful lot of research from the Academy of Criminal Justice Sciences and the American Society of Criminology that notes that most people, a great preponderance of people, depending again on jurisdiction, somewhere between 50 and 80% of people are in jail and bailed less than $1,000, right? So that also demonstrates that the crimes that they're incarcerated for are not the serious crimes that you see on the news all the time, right? These are people that are not likely to reoffend. They still do have something to lose, right? Because they probably didn't commit a very serious crime. They might have some stable home life and such. So if we reform the front part of the system, right, all the way through to the end, you have this holistic reformation approach. Reducing mandatory minimums is also something that is important. Do we really need to spend taxpayer money and research and taxpayer money and just time and effort on locking people up for 20 years for having crack cocaine, but 2 years for powder cocaine? It's the same drug. But mandatory minimum says you have to. Judicial discretion, right? Mandatory minimums remove judicial discretion, and judges are not free to then make a determination on what is the appropriate sentencing for this particular individual. So I think it is appropriate to allow judges to have a little bit more discretion, because there's a lot of times, we see this reported in the news a lot, that people are locked up and the judge did not want to give them that sentence but had to, right? We see it frequently where judges would prefer to downward depart than upward depart. So that is another thing that needs to be done to reform the criminal justice system. So I believe that these things that I highlighted, judicial discretion, reducing mandatory minimums, bail reform, and using a more European model would help in the criminal justice system sentencing reform. Thank you.